The regional director's pen hovered over the termination form like a knife over a rope. "Last question, Mr. Cole," she said. "Did you leave company property during your shift? Or not?" Ethan's throat was dry. His palms were slick against the plastic chair. Through the glass wall of the tiny HR office, he could see his 7-year-old son, Max, swinging his legs in the waiting area, clutching a worn-out backpack and a half-crushed juice box. Out in the store, the intercom played cheerful music, while carts rattled and scanners beeped. In here, the air felt like concrete. His store manager, Troy, leaned back with his cheap cologne and fake smirk. "He abandoned his post," Troy said. "Could have gotten someone hurt out there." Ethan's jaw tightened. He could still see the night in his mind, the snow whipping sideways, the empty loading dock, the old man in the wheelchair shivering behind the dumpsters, because the paratransit van never came. He hadn't abandoned his post. He'd made a choice. "We have security footage," the director continued. "You took the forklift keys. You opened the dock gate. You were gone for 11 minutes. Is that correct?" Ethan swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. But if you'd just let me explain." The door opened. Cold air swept in from the sales floor. A voice, steady and familiar, cut through the tension. "Maybe I can help explain," the older man said, tapping his cane on the tile. "I'm the reason he left. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Let me take you back to the beginning, before the HR office, before the paperwork, before anyone in that big box store knew who Ethan Cole really was." Ethan was 33, the kind of man you'd pass in the hardware aisle and forget 5 seconds later. Brown work boots, faded polo with the store logo name badge half scratched from years of sliding pallets and riding a forklift in circles. He worked the evening shift at a massive warehouse store on the edge of Columbus, Ohio, where the parking lot felt like its own county, and the lights never truly went off. His life ran on a tight loop. Get Max to school, nap in the tiny apartment pack, sandwiches, clock in by 3-haul inventory. Until close, then pray his old Honda started in the cold. Since his ex-wife moved to Florida to find herself, it had just been Ethan and his boy in a second-floor walk-up that always smelled faintly like someone else's cooking. Money was thin. The rent jumped every year. Max was growing faster than Ethan's paycheck. There were nights Ethan stared at the past due notice on the electric bill and wondered which part-time gig he could add without collapsing. But he showed up. Every shift, every parent-teacher conference, every science fair, even when he walked in still smelling like motor oil and cardboard dust. What he never talked about was his old life, those 2 years as a combat medic in the Army Reserve before a bad knee and a worse deployment sent him back home. He'd left that part of himself in the desert sand, or at least he tried to. Now he was the forklift guy, not the man who once kept soldiers breathing in the back of a shaking Humvee. His values were simple and stubborn. You don't leave people behind. You don't lie. And you try to be the dad you wish you'd had. Max thought he hung the moon, and on the nights when Ethan's knee burned and his chest felt tight with worry, that belief was the only thing that kept him standing. The winter that everything changed Ohio was swallowed in snow. Wind knifed across the parking lot, piling drifts against the loading docks. One late Thursday, with closing time just minutes away, Ethan was doing his final walkthrough of the back lot, checking that the bay doors were locked, the forklifts plugged in, the yard empty. He rounded the corner of the building and saw it a wheelchair half buried in blowing snow, a thin figure hunched in it, shoulders shaking. The paratransit sign on the post was crusted with ice, and the van that should have come an hour ago was nowhere in sight. The man's lips were blue. His hands trembled around the handles of an oxygen tank. Ethan stopped dead in his tracks, snow stinging his face. If he followed the rules, he'd turn around, clock out, and pretend he hadn't seen a thing. Instead, his heart started pounding in that old familiar way, the way it used to when a radio call crackled. "We've got a man down." That was the moment, the choice in the snow that set everything else in motion. Snow drifted like ash as Ethan trudged across the back lot, pushing against the wind. He didn't see himself as a hero. He wasn't thinking about rules or job descriptions or company policy. He just saw a man freezing in a wheelchair and did what his gut told him to do, what his training years ago had demanded MOVACT help. He got the man inside, sat him near a space heater in the tool rental area, called the para-transit line 3 times until someone finally promised a van was en route. He wrapped the man's trembling hands in spare gloves from the return bin and sat with him, steadying his breath. 11 minutes. That's how long it took before another employee spotted them and began asking questions. By the next morning, management had a completely different version of what happened. And the mistreatment only escalated from there. Troy, the store manager, cornered Ethan by the time clock before his shift. "Corporate wants a statement," he said, voice clipped. "You can start by admitting what you did." Ethan blinked. "I told them. A man was in distress. You left the building, Ethan. You left without authorization." He could have argued. He could have asked Troy why a forklift operator had to get written permission to keep someone from losing a finger to frostbite. But he needed this job. He needed the insurance for his son's asthma treatments. He needed the paychecks that barely carried them from one end of the month to the next. So he swallowed his frustration and nodded. "I'll write whatever they need." The next few days, the warehouse buzzed with strange energy. Employees whispered in aisles when he walked by. Some clapped him on the shoulder, murmuring, "Heard you helped that old guy. Sorry they're being jerks." Others avoided him entirely. But the worst came from management. Suddenly, Ethan's nightly work logs were incomplete. His forklift inspections were missing signatures even when he clearly remembered signing them. He was assigned to clean the entire garden center alone in sub-zero wind, while 2 other workers were mysteriously reassigned indoors. He came back inside, barely able to feel his fingertips, and Troy had the audacity to say, "You'll warm up. Grab a broom and finish the back aisle too." Ethan didn't complain. He dragged the broom behind him, arm muscles aching from the cold knee throbbing under his brace. At 33, he wasn't old, but that leg had never been the same since the desert. Some days it gave out without warning. He lived in fear of it buckling in front of customers or co-workers, one more reason for management to judge him. Still, he pushed through. He always did. At home, Max noticed. One night, the boy sat at the kitchen table picking at his spaghetti. "Dad," he said, "why are you limping so much?" Ethan forced a smile. "Just tired, buddy. Is the store being mean again?" Kids didn't need details. They just felt things in their bones. Ethan slid into the chair across from him, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "It's complicated." "Are they gonna fire you?" Max asked quietly. The question hit harder than any winter wind. "I hope not," Ethan said. "I'm doing my best." The truth was more troubling. He wasn't sure if doing your best meant anything to people like Troy. Max chewed for a moment, then added, "I can get a job. I can sweep stuff or carry little boxes or help customers." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "You're 7, pal. I'm strong." He reached across the table, ruffling the boy's hair. "You're stronger than most grown-ups I know, but this isn't your burden." Max's eyes lifted, shimmering. "I don't want you to lose our home." Ethan pressed his lips together, fighting the sting behind his eyes. Ever since the divorce, Max had clung tightly to the idea of stability. He'd overheard too many arguments, witnessed too many tearful phone calls, lived through too much uncertainty for someone so young. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said firmly. "And neither are you." But inside he wasn't so sure. By the end of the week, things at work had deteriorated further. The regional director scheduled a surprise walkthrough. Troy, jittery and edgy, snapped orders at everyone all morning. Cart boys spread out. Floor team face all shelves, no excuses. "Ethan, stay out of sight. I don't want you anywhere near the office while she's here." "Why?" Ethan asked carefully. "Because you're under investigation. Last thing I need is you opening your mouth." Ethan bit down hard on his tongue. Every instinct screamed to push back, but one look at Troy's gloating expression, and he swallowed it. He walked away, heart pounding. Later he heard Troy laughing with the assistant manager near the break room. "The guy actually thinks helping some random off the street makes him a hero. Corporate eats people like him alive." The words burned hotter than the cheap coffee machine ever could. That afternoon, Ethan was assigned to zone the entire lumber aisle by himself. It was a massive job, a half-mile stretch of planks, plywood, sheets, and beams stacked to the ceiling. Normally, 3 or 4 workers handled that section, but today it was all on him. He climbed ladders, shifted boards, straightened tags, double-checked labels. Sweat mixed with dust on his arms. His knee throbbed so badly he had to pause once, bracing against a beam, until the stabbing sensation faded. At one point, he overheard 2 shoppers whisper, "Is that the guy who left the store last week?" "Yeah, the forklift operator. Heard he's in trouble. He looks too young to be messing up like that." He was 33, young enough to still feel hope on good days, old enough to carry a lifetime of responsibilities on his shoulders. He kept working. Hours later, he was still hauling lumber when his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Green, the neighbor who watched Max after school. "Max isn't feeling well. Says his stomach hurts. Wants you." Ethan glanced toward the break room clock. 3 more hours left on his shift. Company policy: no leaving early without managerial approval. He approached Troy at the front counter. "My son is sick. I need to clock out, take him home." Troy didn't even look up from his paperwork. "No, we're short-staffed. It's my kid." "That's not my concern," Troy said flatly. "He's throwing up," Ethan insisted. "I have to pick him up." A long, cold silence stretched. Finally, Troy looked up, expression blank. "If you leave now, consider this job in jeopardy." Ethan stared at him, stunned. "Are you serious? You're already under review. Walking out will only confirm you're unreliable." The words crushed something in him. He tried one more time. "Troy, please." "Do what you want," Troy said, shrugging. "But don't expect sympathy later." Ethan turned away, pulse hammering. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to walk out that door and get to his boy. But if he left, he could lose everything: insurance, rent, food, stability. He made the hardest decision of his life and stayed until the end of his shift, finishing the lumber aisle, while guilt clawed at him with every board he lifted. When he finally clocked out and picked up Max, the boy's face was pale, his body trembling, cheeks streaked with dried tears. "You took so long," Max whispered when he climbed into the car. Ethan tightened his hands on the steering wheel. "I'm here now, buddy. I'm here." But the shame stayed with him all night. 2 days later came the HR call. The regional director was coming in person. Ethan was to report to the small office near the front of the store immediately after his shift. No explanation given. His stomach twisted the entire day. In the break room before the meeting, he overheard 2 co-workers whispering again. "He's done. They're going to fire him." "Yeah," Troy said. "HR wants to make an example out of him." They better. We can't have people breaking safety rules. His chest tightened. When his shift ended, he walked Max through the store to the waiting area, sat him with a comic book, kissed his head, then stepped into the HR office where Troy and the regional director waited. Every accusation that followed felt heavier than the last. Irresponsible, unreliable, violated safety standards, poor judgment, left company property, endangered customers, 11 minutes. A lifetime of kindness shoved under a microscope and twisted into something ugly. He stared out the window at the snowy parking lot, wondering why doing the right thing felt like a crime some days. Then came the final blow. Given the nature of the incident, the regional director said, adjusting her glasses, "We are seriously considering termination." Something cracked in Ethan's chest. The air left his lungs. Max was sitting just 20 feet away, swinging his legs, trusting that his dad would walk out of this room the same man who walked in. He wasn't sure he could. The director lifted her pen. "Mr. Cole, do you have anything else to say before we finalize this?" The pressure in the room was suffocating. Troy leaned back, satisfied, waiting for the kill. Ethan opened his mouth, but the door swung open. A beaten-up cane tapped the floor. A familiar voice said, "Actually, I think you've left out some important details." That was the moment everything shifted, and the storm this time was finally blowing toward the truth. The older man stepped farther into the HR office, bracing himself on his cane. Snow still clung to the shoulders of his heavy coat, melting onto the carpet in small, dark patches. Ethan stared, breath caught halfway in his chest. He hadn't seen the man since the night he'd found him freezing behind the dumpsters, and now here he was standing in the doorway, as if summoned by the very moment Ethan was breaking. Troy's face tightened. "Sir, this is a private meeting." The man lifted a gloved hand, silencing him. "I'll only take a moment." But before anyone could respond, another sound cut through the room, an abrupt, piercing alarm echoing across the sales floor. It wasn't the soft chime of a door sensor or the muted beep of a forklift backing up. This was sharper, shriller, the fire alarm. The regional director sat bolt upright. "Is that real?" A radio crackled from the hallway. A panicked voice shouted code red at aisle 17. Fire. In the paint section. The color drained from her face. Everyone moved at once, chairs scraping back, HR binders slamming shut, Troy bolting for the door. Ethan didn't follow right away. His brain stalled. Aisle 17. That was the hazardous materials aisle. Paint thinner, mineral spirits, aerosol cans, flammable products stacked to the ceiling. A fire there could blow half the store sky high. Another shout came over the radio. "There's a kid trapped in the aisle. He can't get out." Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. A kid. Max was sitting right outside the HR office, but another child, someone else's, was in danger, steps away from a wall of explosive chemicals and a fire big enough to swallow an entire warehouse. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He just moved. By the time he sprinted through the HR doorway, Troy was standing in the middle of the main aisle, frozen in fear, as smoke rolled from the far end of the store. The fire suppression sprinklers hadn't triggered yet. The system had a delay, and they were still in the dead zone where any spark could become a catastrophe. Ethan shoved past him. Cole Troy shouted, "Stop! You're not authorized! Authorized!" He threw the word over his shoulder. "Call 911. Then he ran. Customers were scrambling in every direction toward the exits, toward family members, toward anywhere that wasn't the rolling cloud of black smoke rising from aisle 17. Employees tried to help, but panic spread faster than any flame could. Someone knocked over a display of folding chairs. Another customer tripped. The overhead lights flickered. The smoke thickened. Ethan ran harder. The memories crashed into him. Not the joyful ones. Not birthdays or first steps or quiet evenings helping Max sound out spelling words. No, the other ones. The desert heat. The explosion. The Humvee that rolled. The soldier whose breath he held steady with both palms while shouting for a medic bag that never came fast enough. The smell of burning rubber and dust. He pushed through it. A crack sounded ahead, sharp, violent. Something collapsed in the aisle. Someone screamed. Ethan skidded to a stop at the mouth of aisle 17. Smoke billowed out in thick waves, swallowing the long row of shelves. The overhead lights blinked and buzzed, casting a sickly glow through the haze. The fire was hidden halfway down the aisle, orange light flickering around the edges of cardboard boxes and metal shelving. "Help!" A child's voice cried from within. "Somebody, please!" A silhouette appeared in the smoke, a small shape, crouching behind a toppled display. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, yanked the pin with his teeth, and plunged into the smoke. Heat slammed into him immediately, prickling the skin on his arms and face. The air tasted metallic, thick, almost chewable. His eyes stung watering until the aisle blurred. He crouched low, keeping the extinguisher angled ahead of him, sweeping bursts of foam toward the growing flames as he moved forward. "Kid," he shouted, voice raw. "Keep talking to me. I'm here," the child sobbed. I can't move the shelf." A shelving unit had partially collapsed, metal twisted and bent, pinning the child's leg beneath a pile of paint cans and a heavy cardboard box. Sparks snapped from somewhere above, raining down tiny embers. Ethan dropped to one knee beside him. "You're okay," he said firmly. "I'm gonna get you out." The boy couldn't have been older than 9. His cheeks were streaked with soot and tears. He gasped when Ethan touched the shelf, panic rising in a high-pitched cry. "It hurts, I know," Ethan said. "Breathe, look at me." The child's terrified eyes locked onto his. "You're gonna be fine," Ethan said, "but we have to move fast." He wedged his boot under the shelf, braced his hands around the frame, and pushed. His injured knee screamed in protest. Pain tore through his leg like lightning. For a moment he thought it would buckle. No, not now. Not with a kid trapped here. He pushed harder, teeth gritted so tightly he tasted blood. The metal groaned, shifted, lifted half an inch, enough for the boy to yank his leg free. Ethan grabbed him under the arms. "Got you," he murmured. But as he turned, a flame burst up the side of a nearby pallet, scorching the paint cans and sending a wave of blistering heat toward them. Instinct kicked in. Ethan shielded the boy with his own body, turning his back to the fire. The heat seared through his shirt, scorching his skin. The boy screamed, "Hang on!" Ethan yelled. He sprayed the extinguisher in a wide arc, carving a narrow path through the smoke. The foam hissed as it hit the flames, buying precious seconds. He lifted the boy into his arms, light, trembling, soot-covered, and ran toward the end of the aisle. The ceiling above them popped. A shower of sparks fell. Ethan lowered his head and sprinted. They burst through the end of the aisle just as the sprinkler system finally activated. A roar filled the air as water gushed from the overhead pipes, drenching the store. The fire behind them hissed violently. Employees gasped. Shoppers stopped mid-run. And a silence, strange, sudden, reverent, fell across the crowd as Ethan staggered into view, holding the shaking child against his chest. For a moment, he just stood there, catching his breath, water dripping from his hair and running down his scorched shirt. The world blurred at the edges. Everything sounded far away, shouts, footsteps, alarms, like echoes underwater. He sank to one knee in front of the nearest employee, handing the child over. "Get him checked out," Ethan said, voice barely audible. The boy clung to him instead. "You saved me," he whispered. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat and gently pried the child's fingers from his collar. "It's okay, buddy. You're safe now." When he finally stood, a crowd had formed. Employees, customers, managers, even the regional director, her clipboard forgotten at her side. And Troy. He looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. 2 firefighters rushed in through the front doors, hoses in hand. The spray from the sprinklers glistened in the bright store lights, falling like artificial rain. Smoke drifted through the air in lazy, ribbon-like curls. "Who got the kid out?" the first firefighter demanded. Dozens of eyes turned toward Ethan. He shook his head weakly. "I just did what anyone would have." "No," the firefighter said firmly. "Not anyone." The older man with the cane stepped forward, boots splashing in the pooling water. His voice carried steady and clear. "That man," he said, pointing at Ethan, "did what your entire management team should have done long before this fire broke out." He acted when others froze. Troy opened his mouth, but the regional director cut him off with a raised hand. Her eyes stayed on Ethan, wet, stunned, humbled. "This changes things," she said quietly. Ethan didn't respond. His knee throbbed, his back burned. All he could think about was Max waiting at the front of the store, scared out of his mind. The firefighter touched Ethan's shoulder. "Let's get you looked at." But before Ethan could move, a small voice broke through the crowd. "Dad." Max barreled toward him and threw his arms around Ethan's waist, holding tight, despite the wet clothes and the lingering smell of smoke. "I saw the fire," he cried. "I saw you run in." Ethan hugged him close, closing his eyes as relief washed over him like warm summer rain. "I'm here," he murmured. "I'm right here." Around them, the store was a mess of water and smoke and chaos. But the power dynamic had shifted. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. The quiet forklift operator, the man under review, the man nearly fired, had saved a child's life with nothing but grit, courage, and a heart that refused to look away when someone needed him. Whatever came next would not be decided in a tiny HR office. It would be decided by the truth now laid bare for the whole store to witness. The store felt strangely hollow once the flames were out. Sprinklers still wept from the ceiling, dripping in uneven rhythms onto the ruined displays. Smoke drifted in thin gray ribbons through the aisles like ghosts dissolving. Customers who had fled earlier now edged back inside, murmuring, pointing, whispering. The firefighters moved equipment, checking hot spots, shutting valves, giving orders with clipped voices. Ethan stood near the front registers, his clothes still damp from sprinkler water, the back of his shirt scorched and peeling. His knee throbbed with every heartbeat. Max clung to his side, refusing to let go even for a second. And for the first time in a long time, no one walked past Ethan like he was invisible. People watched him now, some in awe, some in disbelief, some with guilt softening their faces. The boy he'd rescued sat on a folding chair a few feet away, wrapped in a blanket one of the firefighters had given him. His mother knelt in front of him, brushing soot from his cheeks, kissing his forehead between frantic tears. Every few seconds, she looked up at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper, something like reverence. "You saved my baby," she whispered when she finally approached him. "I don't even know your name." "Ethan," he said softly, "and I'm just glad he's okay." But her eyes said she didn't believe the just for a second. Behind her, the regional director stood with two district managers who had arrived after the fire reports spread. Their suits were soaked at the hems, but none of them seemed to notice. Their eyes were fixed on Ethan in a way that made his stomach twist. Not fear, not judgment, just scrutiny, recognition, as if they were seeing him clearly for the first time. The older man with the cane, Frank Powers he'd said his name was, stood beside the service desk, arms crossed, watching Ethan with a quiet intensity. His presence alone seemed to hold the entire room steady. Every time someone whispered or pointed, Frank's gaze drifted their way steady and sharp, like he was measuring reactions. And then came Troy. The store manager hovered at the edge of the growing crowd, his usually smug expression washed away by a mix of shock and something like dread. His eyes darted between Ethan, the firefighters, the regional director, the frightened mother. He wiped his palms on his slacks again and again, unable to mask the tremor in his fingers. The regional director stepped forward. "Ethan," she said carefully, "we need to speak, now." Max's grip tightened around Ethan's waist. "It's okay, buddy," Ethan murmured. "I'm right here." But as he followed the director toward the break area, Frank Powers stepped forward. "I'll come too," Frank said firmly. The director hesitated. "Sir, this is a corporate matter." Frank tapped his cane once. "Then you'll want to hear what I have to say." Something in his tone told her arguing wasn't an option. She nodded stiffly. They moved into the employee training room, a wide, bland space filled with folding chairs and posters about teamwork and safety. The sprinklers had soaked the carpet at the edges, giving the room a sharp mildew smell. A small crowd gathered outside, craning their necks to see. Ethan stood there, shivering slightly, his shirt sticking to his burned skin. He didn't sit. He felt like if he lowered himself into a chair, his body might refuse to rise again. The regional director began, her voice shaking slightly. "Ethan, what you did back there was..." "Reckless," Troy blurted, stepping forward. "Completely reckless. He endangered himself, the child, and the entire store. Running into a burning aisle, he could have..." "Stop talking," Frank said. Troy blinked. "Excuse me, I said stop," Frank repeated in a tone that brooked no disagreement. "Because before you embarrass yourself further, there's something everyone here needs to understand about the man you're trying to lecture." The room quieted. Frank turned to Ethan. "You told me not to say anything that night, didn't you?" Ethan stiffened. His stomach dropped. He remembered the conversation barely over that space heater behind the dumpsters when Frank's trembling hands finally stopped shaking, and gratitude spilled out of him in words that weren't meant to be repeated. "I don't want special treatment," Ethan had said. Frank exhaled slowly, his breath white in the chilly air of the training room. What he did today wasn't luck, or panic, or stupidity like some people might assume. His eyes hardened as they landed on Troy. It was training. The room stilled. Frank continued, voice steady. "I recognized the way he moved in that aisle, how he assessed the fire, controlled his breathing, shielded that child, used the extinguisher, protected the airway, and when he checked that boy for shock before handing him off. That wasn't instinct. He turned, letting the weight of the revelation settle. That's a medic, a real one. That's someone who has pulled people out of burning vehicles and treated injuries under conditions that would make most of us collapse." A ripple of murmurs swept through the room. Troy's mouth dropped open. What?" Ethan swallowed. "I didn't want that part of my life brought up." Frank nodded. "Then I'll say it for you." He faced the regional director. "This man served 2 tours as a combat medic in the Army Reserve. He has saved more lives than any of us here will ever know. And now you're telling me he's under review. You're telling me this company, this manager almost fired him for stepping away to help someone in distress? The director looked stunned. She turned to Ethan. Is that true? You served? He nodded once. Quietly, uncomfortably. And you never disclosed it. I didn't think it mattered, Ethan said. I just wanted to do a normal job, be a normal dad. That part of my life, I left it behind. Frank shook his head. You may have tried, son, but today proved you're still who you were built to be. Troy's voice cracked with disbelief. But he didn't follow protocol. He left his station. The director held up a hand so sharply that Troy actually flinched. Enough. She took a deep breath, struggling to keep her composure. We nearly lost a child today. We could have lost customers, staff. If he hadn't acted, we might be having a very different conversation. She stepped closer to Ethan, lowering her voice. You ran into an aisle that could have exploded. Ethan didn't respond. You shielded that child with your body. Still no response. You risked your life. Max, still clinging to his father's arm, answered softly. He always helps people. The director swallowed hard. I see that now. Frank tapped his cane. There's one more thing you should know. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wallet. Not just any wallet, but one with a metallic badge glinting inside. Troy's eyes widened. You're a retired, Frank said, sliding the wallet shut. But 15 years as a federal fire investigator gives me enough authority to say the fire in that aisle wasn't accidental. The room erupted. What do you mean? Was someone hurt? Are we in danger? Frank lifted his cane for silence. That girl on the radio, she said she saw a spark fall from the overhead lighting before the shelves ignited. That's consistent with a faulty ballast. I also smelled residual solvent fumes in that aisle earlier this week. Someone ignored a leak. All eyes turned to Troy. He paled. I flagged that last month, he stammered. I mean, I wrote it down to be fixed. But you never sent the maintenance request, Frank said flatly. You didn't take it seriously, and today your negligence almost killed a child. The director rounded on Troy. Is that true? Troy sputtered. I must have forgotten. That's not an excuse, she said sharply. We'll be opening an investigation into your conduct effective immediately. Troy's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan stood there stunned. He hadn't come to clear his name. He hadn't planned for this. But the truth, his truth, the one he'd buried deep under forklift shifts and overtime hours, was now out in the open. And suddenly the room felt too small. The director stepped toward him, gentler now. Ethan, I owe you an apology. We all do. He shook his head. I don't need that. Frank placed a hand on his shoulder. Maybe not. But you deserve it. She exhaled. After today, it's clear we misjudged you. Your actions prevented a tragedy. Your skill saved that child's life. And your integrity. She paused, searching for the word. Your integrity is something we want leading this team, not standing at the bottom of it. Ethan blinked, confused, exhausted, unsure where this was going. Then she said the last thing he expected. We'd like to offer you a new role. Troy's jaw dropped. Max looked up, eyes wide with wonder. Frank smiled quietly, like he'd seen this moment coming from the moment Ethan stopped his truck in the snow. The director continued, voice steady. A supervisory position. Full-time. Salary. Benefits. Leadership training. A position where your experience can actually protect people. She took a small step back, giving him space to breathe. This store needs someone who doesn't just follow rules, someone who knows when humanity matters more. The room held its breath. Ethan felt Max squeeze his hand. He thought of the desert, the sirens, the rushing adrenaline, the oath he'd once taken, the promise to help anyone who needed him, and how he'd tried so hard to pack it away. But sometimes your past doesn't disappear. Sometimes it steps into a burning aisle with you, and sometimes it gives you a new beginning you never asked for. He didn't answer yet. Not because he doubted, but because everything he once ran from had suddenly turned around and found him. And what he did next would change both his life and his son's forever. The training room slowly emptied after the director's offer, but the air felt different, lighter, clearer, almost reverent. Employees lingered near the doorway, watching Ethan with a mixture of pride and apology etched on their faces. Even those who barely acknowledged him before now approached with quiet thanks, or a small nod of respect. The mother of the boy he'd rescued stepped forward again, this time with her son at her side. The child's leg was bandaged, his cheeks still streaked with soot, but his eyes were bright as he clutched a plastic fire truck the firefighters had given him. "Thank you," she said, voice wavering, for not hesitating, for seeing him. Ethan knelt to the boy's height. "You were brave in there," he said. The boy shook his head. "You were brave for both of us." Behind them, Troy stood stiffly, shoulders drooping as the weight of his own negligence settled in. The regional director dismissed him for the evening, but not before she told him a formal investigation was starting in the morning. His usual swagger was gone. For the first time, he looked like a man who understood he had run out of excuses. When the room finally cleared, Frank walked over and rested a hand on Ethan's arm. "You didn't ask for any of this," he said, "but you handled it with more grace than most men twice your age." Ethan nodded, still processing everything, and helped Max put on his jacket. "You really think I can do that job?" Ethan asked quietly. Frank smiled. "I think you've already been doing that job. They're just catching up." 2 weeks later, the store reopened its damaged aisles with new signage, new fire protocols, and a fresh energy that seemed to ripple through every department. Ethan's promotion became official safety and operations supervisor, and with it came a better salary, steadier hours, and health coverage that eased a burden he'd carried alone for too long. Employees who once avoided him now sought his advice. New hires shadowed him. Even the district managers stopped by during peak hours, shaking his hand and thanking him for the changes he'd implemented: weekly safety checks, emergency response training, updated equipment. The transformation wasn't loud or showy. It was a quiet shift, one built on trust. And at the center of it all was Ethan Boots, still dusty shirts, still simple, but shoulders just a little straighter. One afternoon, as he reviewed incident reports at a newly cleared desk, Troy knocked on the doorframe. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the arrogance that used to fill a room. "I wanted to say..." Troy cleared his throat, struggling for the words. "I was wrong." Ethan studied him, unsure what to say. "I ignored things I shouldn't have." Troy continued. "I cut corners, treated people badly. You paid the price for that. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I am sorry. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't eloquent. But it was real." "Thank you," Ethan said. "That means something." Troy nodded once, then stepped away, leaving the door open behind him. Spring came early that year, softening the edges of winter. Max started sleeping easier. The nights weren't filled with the same anxious questions about rent or losing their home. He proudly told his classmates that his dad stopped a fire, though Ethan always corrected him. It was just one aisle, buddy, and the boy always rolled his eyes with a grin. One Friday evening, Frank invited them to a small diner across town, the kind with red vinyl booths and a jukebox humming old country songs. Frank moved slowly with his cane, but there was a sharper spark in his eye than before. "You know," Frank said between sips of coffee, "I spent a lot of years thinking people didn't stop to help each other anymore. Then a stranger pulled over in the snow and treated me like a human being." Ethan smiled, rubbing a hand over the back of his neck. Frank continued, "You reminded me that decency doesn't disappear. It just hides sometimes, waiting for someone to carry it forward." Later that night, walking back to their car, Max tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Dad, he said you're different now." Ethan looked down. "Different how you look. Lighter. Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Out of the mouths of children. I guess I'm finally standing up straight," he said softly. Max nodded, satisfied, and slipped his hand into his father's. Months passed. The store thrived. The fire investigation confirmed faulty wiring and poor maintenance documentation, but also highlighted the rapid response that prevented severe casualties. Ethan was invited to speak at a regional meeting about crisis management. He dreaded public speaking, but did it anyway because Frank told him leaders didn't get to hide in the back aisles. He went home that night to find Max asleep at the table. Crayons scattered around him, a half-finished drawing in front of him. It showed a firefighter's helmet, a forklift, and a man pulling a child out of smoke. At the top, messy letters spelled out, "My hero dad." Ethan scooped him up gently and carried him to bed. For the first time in years, he felt something inside settle. The world hadn't suddenly become fair or easy, but it felt possible again. Brighter, not because of the promotion or the praise, but because he'd stopped pretending that the part of him built to help others had to stay buried in the sand of a past life. It could live here, too. In Ohio. In a warehouse store. In the quiet hours after closing. In the eyes of a little boy who saw him as more than a man lifting pallets. Sometimes life doesn't reward the loudest or the strongest. Sometimes it rewards the ones who show up anyway, cold-tired, hurting, and still choose to do what's right. And if you hold on to that long enough, the world just might find a way to bring the light back around.